my experience of learning my quiche is that place and people and positionality are really important for understanding the cosmologies of this language, for understanding the logics of this language. So place and history are at the forefront of the process of learning it, which to me comes back to kind of my origins of thinking about language in my family, of thinking about language in an academic setting, and thinking about language in a research setting.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language,
Dr. Polly Lauer shares how radio and other mass media have contributed to the revitalization of Indigenous language and community.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelika Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. Today, we are joined by Polly Lauer, a Klarman Postdoctoral Fellow in the Department of Romance Studies here at Cornell. Dr. Lauer's work investigates Indigenous language learning through media, and we will learn about Indigenous radio in Guatemala and more today on our podcast.
Welcome to Speaking of Language, Polly.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
We're delighted to have you, and we're hoping that to get us started, you could share with our listeners a bit about your background and path with languages.
Of course. So I'll say I'm a historian, and for me, language represents connections to place, to people, and to positionality. Mm-hmm. And that's a long way of saying history for me. Mm-hmm. It's a thing that unites all of these things and understanding the past and the present. And I am someone who loves deeply rooted places. I come from a small town. I really identify with that small town. And simultaneously, I've also always been really interested in Latin America since I was a small child. And so at age 11, when it came time to choose either Spanish or French in school, Spanish was the obvious choice.
Yeah.
I also come from a family where wordplay and humor are a way of communicating, and listening to the podcast, it sounds like that's kind of a common trend among your listeners. Yeah. And everyone on my maternal side actually speaks two languages in addition to English. I think it's just something that is a mutual interest among all of us. And so across my whole family, we really love thinking with language, about language. We love mixing languages. And so it's been a really cool journey for me to come from a household where language was really important. And then in college, as an undergrad, I continued with Spanish. I learned about Latin American studies, which was an amazing place that really opened my mind. And then at my senior year, I was able to do an honors thesis. And to any undergrads listening or to any professors listening who are mentoring undergrads considering honors theses, I think everyone should do one. I think they're a really important stage of learning. And for me, it was amazing to do this research in another language, in Spanish. And this was my first chance to think about Spanish beyond the classroom setting and to really dive in, and everything kind of gelled in a new way as I was doing my own original research, working in the archives, doing interviews, getting around. It also, in that process where I was working with native language or native media makers, I came to understand the need that I also need to learn the language they speak, Maya Quiche. And this is not just to understand what they're doing, which is very, very important for doing this research, but it's also to show respect. And so I started to learn Maya Quiche, and I was really lucky to be able to work with a really wonderful team of Maya language teachers throughout graduate school. And one of the things that's been amazing for me is that this is a language that really values wordplay, that really values word pairings, where humor is really, really important. And also beyond that, this particular language, and I think this is true of literally all languages, but my experience of learning my quiche is that place and people and positionality are really important for understanding the cosmologies of this language, for understanding the logics of this language. So place and history are at the forefront of the process of learning it, which to me comes back to kind of my origins of thinking about language in my family, of thinking about language in an academic setting, and thinking about language in a research setting.
Fantastic. Polly, your work broadly focuses on Indigenous media from the mid-20th century to the present. You've already touched on what drew you to this area of study, but can you dive in a little bit deeper for us? For example, how did the focus on Guatemala come about?
So, as a historian, I partner in collaborative research with Indigenous media makers to understand the work of Native language media production.
Mm-hmm.
And media produced in Native languages is crucial to sharing news, education, and entertainment in accessible, culturally appropriate terms. And it also keeps Native languages alive and active and relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, radio is particularly important for Native communities, especially in rural spaces. It's cheap, it's wide-reaching, it can transcend physical barriers like mountains, imagined barriers like national borders. You don't need anything but batteries to make a radio operate. And on the language front, it doesn't require fluency or literacy in colonial languages like Spanish, Portuguese, or English. And so I specifically work with Maya Quiche broadcasters in Guatemala to study the history of Native language radio. And Guatemala is a really interesting place to do this. It has one of the largest Indigenous populations in the Americas. So I've been working with Indigenous broadcasters in Guatemala for going on 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And the station that I currently work with, I was invited by their team to undertake this research. In 2019, they learned about my previous research and were really excited about the idea of someone documenting their history. And so they said, would you consider coming and writing our history? And I was like, yes, please. I would love to do that. That's such a rare opportunity for a graduate student to be welcomed into a community and to be trusted with really sensitive personal information. And so it's been a real journey working with them. And my methods are, I use mixed methods. I'm an interdisciplinary scholar. And for me, methods are a really important part of the practice of research. And language is an important part of those methods, right? Learning Maya Quiche. But in the process of working with them both in the archive and in person as a member of their team, when I'm in Guatemala, I work as a camera operator because they now also do a lot of video transmissions. It's been amazing to work with them. And in the process, I've learned about the different crises and challenges that they've faced. And I've also seen the strategies that they use to overcome them. And so for my research, what's been really important is to take up Native scholars' calls to move away from centering damage and instead to think about how Native communities continue despite those crises, despite that damage, separate from that damage. And so my research in Guatemala has really come to focus on how has this Indigenous radio station that I work with, which is the longest operating Maya language radio station in the country, they've been operating since 1962 continuously. No other station in the country has been operating that long or without having to go off the air at different points for different reasons. How have they done that? And this is through periods of genocide in the early 1980s against the Maya population. This is through neoliberal policy change that pushed a lot of broadcasters off the air. This is through out-migration that profoundly changed who and where their audience is.
Yeah. So how many materials do they actually have in archives? Is it all just like the previous radio recordings or different documents? Like, what are you working with in the archive there?
The archive is a really complex space in the context of this project, and that is part of why I also use ethnography and oral history to complement it. Broadly speaking, archives in Guatemala are partial. They're all archives are partial. We know this from archival theory, but particularly in Guatemala, which is a country that recently faced war, the country had an armed conflict that spanned from 1960 to 1996, culminated in a genocide against the Maya population in the early 1980s, a lot of documents were intentionally destroyed. They were kept in repositories that were either intentionally burned by military forces, intentionally burned by guerrilla forces. People destroyed documents on the spot, and I can kind of tell an interesting story about that later. So it's very difficult to find physical document materials from the 20th century. However, I've been really fortunate to have been given the opportunity by the radio station to just comb through the whole station and work with all the materials they have. The collections are incomplete. They are damaged by water. They are damaged by just mold and time.
Sure.
But they also show a really interesting, rich history that portrays the networks that the station has maintained throughout the Americas with peer Indigenous stations, with U.S. donors, with Catholic missionaries, with linguistic scholars. So it's a really mixed bag. It's really interesting to piece it together. And one of the things that I love most about this process and the process of working with a team of people in the radio station is I will frequently find a document. It might just be a few pages of an original, much longer thing. And I'm able to take it to the senior broadcasters and say, can you tell me a little bit about how this document was used when it was more complete? And they might say, I've never seen that before in my life. How interesting. Let me take a look at it. And that will prompt a whole different conversation.
Sure.
Or they'll take a moment and say, actually, yes, we used this workbook to meet with students who were interested in learning Spanish. And this was a page from that. On the other hand, working with junior broadcasters, it's been amazing for them to take an interest in this history. And for them to, one of them and I always talk about how before we kind of started going through these documents together, she had kind of ignored them thinking, oh, those are just old books. They don't have anything to do with what we're doing here now. And she's come to really value the programming and the scripts and the different themes that are in their pages and has kind of started working them into her programs sometimes. And it's just been really cool as a dialectical process, as a dialogue, working through these documents with the members of the staff, both senior and junior.
Are some of the senior broadcasters, like, how long have they been around in that radio station?
The most senior broadcaster now has been working there since the early 1980s.
Wow,
so he has a career of over 40 years. He started there as a young guy in his late teens. And it really was a place of, and it continues to be a place of celebrity in the community. It is something people are really excited. And just in the same way in the United States that if you get to be on the radio or on a cool podcast like this, everyone in your family is excited to listen. All of your friends are excited to listen. So it was the same thing that for him joining, he always talks about it as it was such an honor for me to finally get behind the microphone, having spent my childhood going to my friends and family's houses, listening to this radio station. This was a period of collective listening up until kind of the late 80s, early 90s when kind of the way people listen to radio changed to more individual.
Right.
Awesome. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you have a specific story that you wanted to share with us about your archive search.
So one story that I think is my favorite, most unexpected moment of research was there is a specific workbook that this radio station worked with in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And everyone I've talked to about their experience of being a student of this radio station, because this radio station was an educational program. It's where a lot of people received their primary and secondary education, was referring back to this one specific workbook. And I looked high and low across the formal archives of Guatemala, across the national archives, across the private archives, and I found nothing. I was in the library of the National Federation of Native Language Radio Stations, nothing. I found similar books. I found things that alluded to it, but no examples directly of it. And everyone I talked to in the town where I worked would always say, you know, it was not subversive material, but it was material that had quite an overt call for justice in a time of great oppression. So we would destroy them on the spot after we used them. We would just burn them.
Yeah.
And I spent years looking for this book. And I would occasionally just do a random Google search after a while because I had kind of given up hope. And I would just look up its name and think maybe it's ended up in some European solidarity collection. Maybe someone will have digitized it who smuggled it out of Guatemala. Who knows?
Sure.
Let's see. And so last spring, I do a not very helpful Google search, and I finally get a hit for it that is an actual PDF scanned pages of it.
Wow.
From a recently declassified CIA document.
Wow.
From the 1980s. In this CIA document, they were gathering materials of alleged subversion. And it included pages from this document.
That's crazy.
And it was crazy. And it was amazing to see them for the first time and to see what they looked like.
Yeah.
And it was also unbelievable to think about the fact that people were destroying them on the spot because they were worried about surveillance and retribution. And indeed, the CIA had collected it for exactly that reason. And so I went back to Guatemala with a printout of this report from the CIA.
Yeah.
And I bring it to the senior broadcasters and I say, I have some news for you. I was able to finally find a couple of pages of that document. You were right to have destroyed it because it was misconstrued as subversive material.
That's crazy.
And they just look at me and go, well, yeah. And that was the whole long and short of it for them was, we told you that.
Yeah. Wow.
But for me, it was really an electric moment. It was a hair-raising moment.
Totally.
It was a heartbreaking moment.
It gives me the chills.
Yeah. So that's just an interesting moment of archival and human experience combined together. And as a reminder to grad students out there doing research, keep on digging and keep on looking for those specific documents you might have given hope up on because they might still exist and they might be in really crucially important places.
Yeah.
Incredible. So while we're talking about your work with the radio station, we should mention that it's the subject of your interdisciplinary collaborative book project, Struggling for Air. Can you tell us a little more about the process? You've talked about your research process quite a bit, but about what went into creating the work and what we can expect from it.
So thank you for asking this. For folks who aren't familiar with kind of the discipline of history, the way book projects come about, first book projects, is they are kind of the next version of the dissertation. So this book comes out of my dissertation, out of 10 years of research with native radios in Guatemala, and specifically focuses on the history of this specific radio station in Highland, Guatemala. Each chapter of the book focuses on kind of a different decade of the radio's life, going from the 1960s to the 2010s. And each chapter focuses on a period of struggle or crisis and the strategies that the broadcasters developed to overcome that. And it frequently offers comparisons to other radio stations that took quite different trajectories. So the first chapter goes from a group of missionaries from Spokane, Washington, arriving in Guatemala, seeking to teach Spanish so that they can promote a very specific Romanized version of Catholicism. And so they found this radio station. And very quickly, the community gets involved and the radio station becomes a very different project. So chapter 2 looks at the shift towards a less hierarchical radio station and less of a missionary project of Catholic evangelization, and shifts towards the creation of more of a lateral space. This is also after Vatican II. This is the church is in a moment of change. This is also during the Cold War. So development experts are fanning out over Latin America, promoting different projects that, in their mind, will stem the rise of communism in rural communities. And so chapter 2 thinks about how do the first generation and second generation of Maya broadcasters start to make the station their own and start to infuse more Maya logics into this missionary project. At the same time, this is also when war is beginning and escalating. And so by the end of that chapter, it's shifting into the period of genocide. So the third chapter then looks at how did this radio station survive genocide? And this is a really important question in Guatemala. Many of its peers faced assassinations, raids, closures, disappearances. This radio station somehow did not. And not all of that history is for us to know. And that's a really important part of this project is being comfortable with what's not to be known by outsiders. But they continued broadcasting in Maya Quiche and Maya Kekchikel, which is a neighboring language, throughout this period when most other native language stations were forced into silence. It was a period of extreme censorship. The following chapter, the fourth chapter, looks at, as the peace process is underway in the late 80s and early 90s, telecommunications also gets restructured in Guatemala, and it becomes a much more commercial corporate space to the exclusion of Indigenous voices. And so it's very difficult for Indigenous broadcasters to legally operate under the new policies that come about during this period of peace following the war. And so I'm thinking about what happens when you are a long-standing radio station at this point. They've been on the air for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
How do they stay on the air when suddenly they're forced to buy or pay for a commercial strength FM frequency? And so I consider the politics and the different levers they used to get around that to achieve being one of the only legally operating native language radio stations in the country. And again, this is a country that is nearly 50% Indigenous. There are over 20 different Maya languages spoken.
Wow.
Only 10 native language radio stations operate legally out of several hundred. And there are it's really difficult to count, impossible to count, but there are several hundred to maybe thousands of Indigenous language radio stations operating without legal authorization. So how did this radio station achieve that? And then the last two chapters think about the 21st century and the shift to digital media and how the radio station relates to Indigenous migrants who have moved to the United States, who are seeking a way to stay in touch with home, to stay in touch with their community, and ultimately to stay in touch with their language, living in spaces where English is now the lingua franca, where they're using Spanish to communicate with other folks from other countries. And it's very hard to continue the use of their own first native language, Maya Quiche or Maya Kekchikel. And so thinking about radio's role in sustaining that for them. And so one of the things that's really interesting for me thinking about language across the trajectory of the book is how this radio station begins as a place that's teaching Spanish to a monolingual native language speaking community, and how it very quickly becomes a space promoting the use of native languages over Spanish, and now is involved in the work of native language revitalization and celebration.
So you just alluded to digital media and how everything has changed in terms of how the radio station is reaching their listeners. So other than radio, what other kinds of communication technology does your research investigate? And how have these different types of media helped or perhaps hindered the preservation of language community and autonomy for these Indigenous groups?
Yeah, so I think one thing to kind of broaden that question is, what is radio to begin with? Because radio is actually an umbrella term that refers to a lot of different types of communication technologies, and it also includes digital formats. This project looks at radio in a long perspective. It goes from shortwave, which is, I am not a science person. I am not a technology expert. I have learned about this technology in 2 languages, neither of which are my first language. But the really interesting thing about FM radio, about shortwave radio, is that it has a very wide reach because of the way the signals work. They skip. So you might have people able to tune in to a shortwave radio station on the other side of the world.
Wow.
But maybe someone locally can't hear it because the frequency has just bounced right over them. The next iteration of that is FM radio, which has a much clearer signal, is much more even across the local terrain, but is not going to have that wide reach that might make it all the way to the other side of the world. Then you have digital radio. And this is something that kind of raises questions of what is the difference between podcasting and digital radio? And I don't have an answer to that. But the use of online streaming platforms, websites like TuneIn are really popular in Guatemala. But then beyond that, there are other media platforms that expand how radio works within the specific context that I'm working with in Highland, Guatemala. And the first of those is Facebook Live. Facebook Live has become an incredibly popular platform. Radio stations, TV stations are using them to visually broadcast different events around the community. So I would say almost every other day, the radio station that I work with is taking 2 to 3 cameras out into the community to invited spaces. They might be school graduations, they might be birthday parties, they might be Catholic celebrations, they might be major festivals like Day of the Dead, and they film those, and then the audio is transmitted over FM. And the audio and visual is also transmitted over Facebook Live. So that's a really interesting space for me as a scholar. One, to think about as a new type of archive. And two, it's one of the first times in the world of radio where you can see immediate engagement. On traditional shortwave and FM radio, if you want to see engagement, you need to do survey polls. You need to get a sense of who's calling in, who's physically stopping by the radio station. It's hard to count who's actually picking up the frequency. On Facebook, there's a number of people tuning in to any one feed, and you also have tons and tons and tons of people writing in the comments. And it's been really beautiful to see. Someone might say, oh, I live just on the other side of the road from where this event is happening, sending my greetings. Or they might say, hi, I'm living in northern New Jersey. Please tell my family I say hello in the comments. So that's really beautiful. And then more recently, the radio station has also taken up TikTok. We've also seen this in the United States, really popular platform. And some of the older broadcasters voiced some concerns about the use of TikTok and Facebook. And they said, we worry that young people are going to forget why radio matters, why radio is important, and forget about some really crucial audiences of radio who, again, are people that are living in spaces where electricity doesn't reach. So you might not have access to a smartphone. People who are on the move or working in the fields. Radio that's operated by batteries is a really important tool. But it's actually the kind of mix and transition between them has gone really smoothly. And like I said, it's operating between and simultaneously both on the FM frequency and on these digital visual platforms.
Well, just to shift gears a little bit, because this is fascinating. In collaboration with the Language Resource Center and other campus units, you are planning an Indigenous knowledge sharing event for the spring semester. Tell me what you're envisioning, what you're hoping for, what sparked this, and what you're hoping to achieve, too.
I am someone who's really enthusiastic about bringing people together. I think it's really important as an allied scholar, as a scholar in solidarity, to create spaces within academia, on campuses, where Native voices are heard, where different perspectives can come together, and where students have access to that. Because I think so frequently on campuses, what is happening on the research side is really divorced from what's happening on the teaching side. And sometimes students don't even realize that their professors are doing really cool research.
Yeah, very true.
So I love putting together events, hosting events that bring together different groups from campuses, students, educators, staff, folks from off campus too. So the event that we are working on planning right now is thinking about Indigenous language media in Latin America and thinking about its importance, particularly right now in this time when more than ever, people are questioning the credibility of news, questioning the importance or the meaning of news. And native language media, community media, alternative media has faced that forever, has been working for so many years to provide people with trusted news, trusted entertainment. And so I'm really enthusiastic about bringing experts on native media to campus to talk, one, about how they work with national publics. How do they work with their audiences within Latin America? And then two, what might it look like to bring native language media into the classroom, particularly into Latin American studies classrooms? And this is a question of translation, which is really difficult and complex when you're working in English language classrooms. My hope for this event is to bring some leading scholars and practitioners to campus who are thinking along those terms, who have dedicated their life's work to either collaborating with native language media makers or to working with media directly, and how this influences scholarship, how this influences understanding within particular contexts in Latin America, and then also what that might look like for the classroom. On the other side of this event, in addition to thinking about the work of Indigenous language media in Latin America in creating alternative spaces of autonomous news, I'm really eager for teachers on campus and students on campus to think about how they can incorporate this into their classroom environments. And this brings in new perspectives into teaching history, into teaching language, into teaching culture. So I'm really enthusiastic about thinking through native language media as a really rich source of teaching material and how we might work towards doing that, particularly when we consider the fact that there are some language barriers, there might be some cultural barriers. And so this panel roundtable promises to offer two kind of unique trajectories of conversation. One on the topic of what does Indigenous media mean in the Latin American context, and what does it mean in the classroom context?
Very nice. That's awesome. So it certainly sounds like you know how to keep yourself busy with lots of trips to archives and ethnographic studies and planning events. Are there any other projects that you would like to share with us? Anything else you're working on?
So another project I'm working on right now, and I'm going to Guatemala on Monday to kind of do the first leg of this work, is turning my dissertation research, my monograph in progress, into a native language radio program.
Oh, cool.
Co-produced with the radio station that I work with in Guatemala. So it'll be them broadcasting their own history back to the community.
That is so cool.
I'm really excited about it. It's something that's really personally and professionally important to me. I was invited to do this research to document the station's history for multiple reasons. And one of those is so that they have a sense of what is their history, because the archives they have are incomplete. They spend a lot of their time thinking about how do we get through today? How do we get through the future? It does not lend a lot of time to reflect on the past.
Right.
And so part of being invited to do this research is to share it back to them, and not just to produce it as an English language series of articles and book chapters and books, but also to make it something that is widely accessible to the community.
Nice. That's awesome.
So we're really excited about it. We're thinking about different formats it might take. One of the things I'm most excited about is within this community, radio plays were very, very popular in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And they still broadcast radio plays made by the first generation of broadcasters in the 60s every year at Christmas and Easter. It's really cool. Unfortunately, the radio station just does not have the staffing or the bandwidth or the time now to make that level of involved program, because radio plays take a lot of props, they take a lot of different voice actors. So one of the things we're thinking about is, could we turn some different vignettes from the station's history into mini radio plays? And the director of the radio station is also really enthusiastic about bringing in youth participants.
Cool.
Oh, nice.
Kids used to have a really big place on the air, and they still do. There's a tradition of coming in and telling jokes into the microphone. They used to have an open mic thing where it would be a couple of hours of just a mic, and kids could come in and out and tell jokes in Quiche on the air. And so this is another space where she's envisioning a place for youth participation and training teens who are interested maybe in a future in media.
Right.
So things they might get from this program are training in the technology, training in formal Maya oratory, which is a really important thing for Maya speech. It is not as emphasized with younger generations as it is with older generations. So this would be a space for them to learn some of the classic rhetorical formulations. And thirdly, it's also a place for them to learn their community's history and to have some contact with senior members of their community. So we're really excited about this program.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big multi-year endeavor, but it's something that for me as a scholar is really important to make sure that the materials that I've gathered and the conclusions I've drawn remain with the community first and foremost.
Yeah.
This is their information. This is their history. It belongs to them. And I want to make it accessible in their first languages and their preferred formats, which is radio.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wonderful.
I love hearing about this. So excited to see how it pans out. So where can our listeners find out more about you and your work, Polly?
People are welcome to write to me at my cornell.edu email address, which is just firstname.lastname@cornell.edu. And I'm under the Romance Studies department page.
Great. And we'll make sure we include that email address in the show notes.
This is such fascinating work that you engage in, and you have a tendency to do very longitudinal projects. I like that. So we are excited to see where all of your projects will take you. Before we sign off, we'd like to ask you for a word in a language you love, you are learning, you want to learn, that makes you feel inspired.
So the word I want to talk about is Maltioshinik, which in Maya Quiche means the act of giving thanks. This is an extended thank you, and it follows a really comprehensive formula, and it recognizes particular things that the speaker holds in esteem, and it acknowledges their own shortcomings, and it really leaves nothing unsaid. So for me, after learning about Maltioshiniks and now having spent many years performing Maltioshiniks, gratitude has kind of infused my whole life. And I love expressing gratitude in all spaces and showing people that I'm grateful for them, for their labor, for their time, for their contributions, no matter their form. And this has also become really important in my classroom spaces. I take a lot of time to thank my students, even if their participation or their performance looks a little different than expected. It's really important for me to express that thanks to them for showing up. And I think it has a lot of meaning for them in reverse. It makes them feel seen. It makes them feel like a valued member of the classroom community. And I also want to take this moment to recognize my first Maya Quiche language teacher who set me on the course of working with this specific station. He unfortunately passed away due to complications from COVID-19, which was really just the most devastating thing. And one of the things that I felt and continue to feel is that because of the Maltioshinik, because of the fact that every time we were together, I thanked him comprehensively, I feel that he really knew how much I appreciated him, how much gratitude I felt for him. And so I want to take a moment to recognize Patweltai and to thank him again. And I also want to thank the two of you for making the space for this podcast, for creating the amazing resources that the LRC offers to the Cornell community, to the language learning community more broadly throughout the country and world. So I'm just really grateful to be here, and I'm really proud to be partnering with you, and thank you.
That's really beautiful to hear, and we are so appreciative of you taking the time to share all that you have learned and have to offer with us here on the podcast. And thank you so much for speaking of language with us today, Polly.
Thank you.
Next week, we will speak with Cornell PhD student Jaden Gethers about the development of his AI speaking partner platform for language learners called Chitter Chatter.
Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
And follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelika Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.